What happens when two of gospel music's biggest names, once seen as brothers in ministry, suddenly turn into bitter rivals? Deitrick Haddon and Kirk Franklin, names that defined a generation of gospel, are now caught in whispers of a feud so shocking it threatens to expose cracks in the very foundation of the gospel industry. This isn't just about music. This is about egos, secrets, and truths no one thought would ever come to light. And trust me, once you hear this, you'll never look at them the same way again. The tension didn't stay hidden for long. In the world of gospel music, few names carry as much influence as Deitrick Haddon and Kirk Franklin. Both are trailblazers, pioneers who have reshaped gospel by breaking barriers, crossing into mainstream culture, and still keeping their roots in faith. But what fans don't often see is what happens when two powerhouse figures like this collide. Behind spotlight, beyond the awards, and away from the pulpit lies a world filled with strong personalities, creative clashes, and yes, sometimes explosive disagreements. In today's video, we're unpacking the private conflict between Deitrick Haddon and Kirk Franklin. What triggered it? What exactly was said? How did it leak out into public conversation? And most importantly, what does this reveal about the current state of gospel music? The details that have come out are more shocking than anyone expected. We'll take you through the history of their relationship, explore the real roots of their tension, and reveal how this disagreement could affect not only their careers but the direction of the entire gospel community. And let me tell you, by the time we get to the end of this video, you won't look at these two men or the gospel music industry the same way again. What began as a private disagreement quickly spiraled into something much larger, a story that forces us to confront tough questions about power, influence, and faith in the public eye. Here's where it gets even more intriguing. Whispers suggest that something said in private, once it surfaced, had the potential to completely shift public opinion in a major way. But before we unpack the weight of this clash, we need to step back and understand who these men are, what they represent, and why their paths crossing matters so much. Kirk Franklin isn't just a gospel artist, he's often called the architect of modern gospel. Since the 1990s, he's been behind some of the most groundbreaking and unforgettable songs in the genre. His music didn't just stay inside church walls, it broke into mainstream charts, reaching people who had never touched gospel before. From collaborating with Mary J. Blige to Kanye West, Kirk has consistently expanded the boundaries of gospel music, redefining its sound. The boundaries of gospel music, redefining its sound and proving just how far it could go. For many, Kirk Franklin isn't just a musician, he's a cultural force who changed the game forever. Deitrick Haddon, however, offers a somewhat distinct avenue within the gospel. Deitrick has frequently been referred to as a pioneer in his own right due to his edgy style, unvarnished lyrics, and ability to blend gospel with modern R&B and hip-hop sounds. Younger audiences who value honesty and transparency even when it goes against conventional conventions find great resonance in his music. In addition to his music, he is well-liked and controversial due to his work as a preacher and his outspoken nature. This is when things start to get interesting. Both individuals have brought the gospel into mainstream settings in their own special ways, but have done so in rather different ways. Deitrick has tended toward audacious individualism, risk-taking, and opposing the status quo, where Kirk Franklin has frequently prioritized harmony, teamwork, and massive shows. Although those distinctions fostered respect for one another, they also paved the way for unavoidable conflict. The two had met at church gatherings, industry events, and award presentations throughout the years. They have occasionally publicly commended one another. At other moments, supporters sensed a hint of anxiety. There were times when it appeared that their ideas for the gospel did not always coincide. Consider it, two strong leaders who are both committed to influencing the gospel's future, but who each think their approach is the best. Those discrepancies were bound to reveal themselves eventually. This is where it becomes even more intriguing. Despite their admiration for one another's work, many insiders felt that an implicit rivalry was always present. Was it influence, musical style, or something more profoundly related to ego and recognition? We can see from this history that the disagreement did not start out that way. It was brought about by years of quiet rivalry, disparate creative ideologies, and the demands of being well-known gospel leaders. However, what specifically triggered the private dispute? At what precise moment did their hidden rivalry become an actual conflict? Things take an unexpected turn at that point. There's a catalyst for every significant fallout, and it wasn't just years of history that set Deitrick Haddon and Kirk Franklin off. There was specific instance and circumstance that took the previously silent strain and made it impossible to ignore. Both men were present at an industry rout, according to gospel community insiders, a gathering designed to honor gospel music's current status and plan for its future. According to reports, a cordial conversation descended into hostility when the topic of direction was up. Should gospel concentrate on maintaining its historic core, or should it rely more on working with mainstream artists? As usual, Kirk Franklin made the case for growth. He has always held the view that gospel music ought to transcend genre and cultural boundaries and be heard everywhere. Collaborations, in his opinion, are a means of sharing the gospel with people who might never visit a church. For him, being in one lane is not what gospel is all about. The goal is to reach as many people as possible with the message. Deitrick Haddon, however, saw things quite differently. He has never shied away from combining other styles, but he has also been outspoken about preserving the gospel's authenticity and rawness. The gospel's authenticity and rawness. Deitrick believes that simply putting gospel musicians next to popular celebrities is insufficient. According to him, gospel should continue to be unique, truthful, and, if necessary, a little awkward. Deitrick vehemently opposed Kirk's vision, cautioning that pursuing popularity could weaken the spiritual foundation of gospel, according to People Fam. The spiritual foundation of gospel, according to people familiar with the matter. This is where things truly started to change. Witnesses claim that what began as a civil discussion swiftly became heated. Known for his charisma and commanding presence, Kirk had no intention of giving up. Deitrick was as vivacious and passionate as he was. According to reports, their statements became more incisive. And although not all of it was captured on camera, rumors of what was said started to circulate practically immediately after the incident. According to others, Kirk was accused by Deitrick of selling out by fusing gospel with popular entertainment. According to others, Kirk claimed that Deitrick was hesitant to change and was content to stay in his lane. One thing is certain, regardless of whether these precise words were said, the conversation was intense, poignant, and illuminating. These men have poignant, and illuminating. These men have been walking in parallel for years. However, those trajectories came together in that instant in a way that neither could ignore. Here's the startling bit though. They didn't simply abandon their argument at that point. Repercussions finally reached those who shouldn't have heard them, including private discussions and phone calls. This is how what began as a private dispute turned into a public controversy that made headlines and rocked the gospel world. It wasn't only about music, which is the most unexpected detail. According to others with knowledge of the matter, the dispute went beyond surface-level concerns and involved deeper questions of power, influence, and even an implicit rivalry over who should be the public face of the modern gospel. You will be astounded by what they spoke behind closed doors, since it was a private conversation that exposed feelings that had been simmering for years. The tale took on a life of its own after those remarks were released. Most people thought the debate would be forgotten after the event was over when the sparks erupted at the industry roundtable. This is evangelical music after all, and private arguments are frequently hidden under public smiles. However, according to insiders, what transpired next elevated the situation to a new level. The discussion not only cooled down but heated up behind closed doors. Deitrick Haddon and Kirk Franklin allegedly exchanged abrasive comments in private that weren't intended to be repeated outside of that room, according to sources close to both men. However, private moments rarely remain private for very long, as is the case with most things in today's media world. According to one story, Deitrick openly questioned Kirk's intentions, charging him with putting prominence and power ahead of genuine service. Deitrick believed that gospel music should not be shaped in any way that would appeal to the general public. He is well known for asserting that the gospel must continue to be daring enough to cause discomfort. Apparently, he thought Kirk's approach was making that edge less sharp. Conversely, Kirk Franklin reportedly retaliated with just as much vigor. According to reports, he reminded Deitrick that sometimes it's necessary to reach outside the church's borders in order to reach souls. Bringing the gospel into previously closed-off settings has been the cornerstone of Kirk's legacy. Award ceremonies, crossover songs that appear on the charts alongside pop and hip-hop records, and partnerships with secular artists. Some claim that Kirk made the deeply hurtful implication that Deitrick's resistance was motivated by jealousy rather than just conviction. When information started to come to light, this is the section that many people found shocking. According to some insiders, Deitrick accused Kirk of using compromise to build an empire. Kirk allegedly implied that Deitrick's refusal to change prevented his career from having the impact it could have. Just think of the impact such words would have. Two men who have dedicated decades of their lives to gospel music are essentially challenging each other's methods and legacy. The gospel community was split as fragments of this conversation started to circulate. Some supporters took Deitrick's side, applauding him for sticking to what they saw as a more pure, uncommercialized gospel. Others took Kirk's side, referring to him as a visionary and supporting his plan to spread the music. A private argument abruptly evolved into a public discussion that touched on the core characteristics of gospel music in the contemporary era, not to mention the emotional component. In addition to being singers, Kirk Franklin and Deitrick Haddon are also pastors, leaders, and influencers in a field where millions of people seek direction. Many fans were disappointed by the idea of them fighting behind the scenes. After all, what did it say about the overall health of the gospel industry if its titans couldn't agree on the genre's future? This is where it becomes even more fascinating though. Words alone did not stop the leaks. According to some, the argument caused the two men to avoid one another at public gatherings, or it caused body language to be more expressive than words. Observers started making connections, highlighting interviews in which nuanced remarks appeared to be omitted. Did these gospel legends' private feuds spill over into their public appearances, or was it just a coincidence? You might be surprised by the response, because what once appeared to be isolated remarks and uncomfortable situations began to form a much bigger picture. Furthermore, it becomes increasingly evident that there was more than one argument as you dig deeper. It was about a long-suppressed rivalry finally coming to the surface. The gospel community was rocked as the specifics of Deitrick Haddon and Kirk Franklin's private dispute started to surface. What began as rumors during a roundtable for the business abruptly became a heated discussion that swept across churches, social media, and even popular blogs. It was more than just words spoken. It has to do with what it stood for. Gospel music has long had to balance innovation and tradition, preserving its spiritual origins while also meeting the needs of a shifting audience. Deitrick Haddon and Kirk Franklin represented both sides of the debate in many respects. With his hit songs and well-executed production, Kirk represented the spread of gospel around the world. Deitrick represented the genre's grassroots authenticity with his unvarnished approach and unyielding attitude. Their disagreement went beyond personal issues. It was an expression of a more profound conflict within gospel music. The consequences were immediate. Conflict within gospel music. The consequences were immediate. Online, fans started picking sides, with contentious discussions erupting in YouTube video comments, Facebook groups, and gospel forums. Supporters of Deitrick commended him for speaking the truth and for not allowing the gospel to lose its essence in order to gain widespread acceptance. They contended that his position was an appeal to return to the core of the gospel, the church, the message, and the spiritual necessity. Kirk's followers, on the other hand, defended him as a visionary. They emphasized how millions of people who might not have otherwise heard gospel had been exposed to it by his crossover popularity. Kirk wasn't softening it by his crossover popularity. Kirk wasn't softening the message for them. He was expanding its scope. Some even said that Deitrick's criticism was motivated more by personal annoyance at not being as well known as Kirk than by any moral conviction. However, the reaction wasn't limited to the fans. Industry insiders started speculating about the potential consequences of this fallout for upcoming award presentations, partnerships, and even the cohesiveness of the gospel community. Would artists now have to choose a side? Would business executives covertly support one side of the dispute, or would they turn away from it? The first faint indications appeared quickly. Kirk and Deitrick were not seated next to each other at some events, and occasionally one would show up while the other was noticeably missing. Opportunities for collaboration that fans once hoped for appeared more and more improbable. The once unifying vision now appeared to be broken. The repercussions becomes much more intriguing at this point. Some gospel musicians started to speak, albeit in coded terms. Some posted ambiguous statements on social media about not pursuing celebrity or keeping the gospel pure, which many saw as subtly endorsing Deitrick. Others discussed the value of reaching a worldwide audience and overcoming barriers, which supporters interpreted as subtle references to Kirk. Whether on purpose or not, the split started to show in the industry. The public, even those outside the gospel community, started to take notice in the meantime. The story was first covered by secular media, who presented it as a rivalry between two religious groups. Some found it strange that two gospel leaders who are recognized for their teachings on harmony, peace, and reconciliation were involved in a dispute that resembled pop and hip-hop celebrity feuds. Uncomfortable questions were raised. What does it say about the example being set for the larger community if gospel leaders are fighting behind closed doors? However, the ramifications went beyond appearances. Some pastors were concerned that the conflict would take attention away from the music's main message. Others contended that from the music's main message, Others contended that despite its messiness, the dispute was significant because it made the gospel community face issues regarding its future. Would the genre face issues regarding its future? Would the genre completely embrace a global popular identity, or would it remain firmly anchored in tradition? The twist is here. Not only did the fallout split artists and fans, additionally, it forced discussions into pulpits at churches, sermons that addressed the tension in a subtle way started to appear. The incident serves as a warning against arrogance and discord. According to several pastors, it served as a reminder to others that everyone battles with ego and strife, including leaders. There was no denying the repercussions. A private dispute between two powerful individuals had turned into a public reflection of the gospel industry, a mirror that exposed the foundation of how the gospel is developing in the modern world, not just the fissures in a bond. Even though this fallout was significant, the most unexpected aspect was yet to come. Because Kirk Franklin and Deitrick Haddon were comparatively silent in public while fans argued and insiders talked, raising the issue of what they were planned behind the scenes. Would they both publicly confront the matter, or would they remain silent and allow rumors to grow? Fans anticipated a strong and immediate reaction when word spread about Deitrick Haddon and Kirk Franklin's quarrel. After all, it's practically instinctive to go online, upload a video, or compose a well-crafted tweet. In order to handle controversy in today's culture, quick remarks and social media clapbacks. However, many were taken aback by both men's deliberate quiet. Both Kirk and Deitrick decided to take a calculated approach rather than openly confirming or refuting the rumors. Meticulously constructing their public personas without ever addressing the obvious problem. Don't be misled, being silent was a tactic, not a sign of weakness. First up is Kirk Franklin. Controlling his story has always been his forte. Kirk is able to divert focus if a dispute comes up, whether it's by releasing brand new music, sharing inspirational content on social media, or joining larger discussions about religion and culture. At this time, Kirk avoided confronting the rivalry directly. Rather, he stepped up his efforts, focusing on partnerships, performances, and ministry experiences that reminded followers of his significance in the gospel. This quiet seemed prudent to some. Kirk maintained the focus on his objective and his image as a unifier by avoiding escalating the argument. Others, however, found the silence instructive, as though he was evading responsibility for the apparently private remarks. Supporters of Deitrick interpreted it as evidence that Kirk was more focused on preserving his reputation than confronting more difficult realities. Let's now examine Deitrick Haddon. Deitrick has a track record of being open and honest. In contrast to Kirk, over the years, he has gained both admirers and detractors for his audacity. However, even Deitrick didn't come out strong during this argument. He leaned towards subtlety instead. He would fervently discuss maintaining the gospel's authenticity and preserving the message in the music during interviews and sermons. Although he never specifically mentioned Kirk, the underlying meaning was obvious to those who were paying close attention. Deitrick's calculated silence had a different effect. He was able to strengthen his position without appearing to be stirring things up. It was welcome to his supporters. He was refusing to participate in the drama while remaining steadfast in his beliefs. But to his detractors, it appeared to be cryptic remarks and pointless insults that served to further polarize the public. It's amazing to see how their methods mirrored their personalities and professional backgrounds. Professional and tactful, Kirk stayed out of the mess. Deitrick allowed his beliefs to overpower his words since he was passionate and unvarnished. Their combined silence was louder than any statement they could have made in public. The industry, meanwhile, kept a close eye on things. Their failure to provide clear answers led to conjecture, which only increased popular curiosity. The gaps were filled by gossip websites. Insiders whispered about what was actually going on behind the scenes, and fans analyzed every interview. The stillness itself, in a sense, became a plot point in itself. The strategic element, however, enters the picture here. By avoiding a public confrontation, both men prevented the dispute from becoming a major scandal that could permanently harm their ministries. Rather, they let the tension simmer, apparent enough to provoke discussion but not loud enough to have permanent consequences. Nevertheless, there were repercussions for this quiet. The lack of transparency disappointed several supporters. They desired accountability, clarity, and closure. Others saw it as a reminder that even powerful people prioritize politics over transparency. People prioritize politics over transparency. Nevertheless, the decision to keep quiet maintained both men's capacity to proceed without being irrevocably shaped by this incident. However, there was no serenity behind the curtain. Insiders insisted that neither man was prepared to make amends and that the tension was genuine. For the sake of future appearances and projects, several even implied that their teams were telling them to wait. What does this indicate then? It indicates that this dispute went beyond a personal altercation. It was a chess game, a calculated balancing act between preserving influence, avoiding fan alienation, and safeguarding reputation. Deitrick and Kirk both played their cards cautiously, knowing the stakes. This is where it becomes even more interesting. Silence is not permanent. The truth eventually slips into the open, whether on purpose or accidentally. When and how Kirk Franklin and Deitrick Haddon would eventually deal with their fallout was the question, not if they would.